And what I'm interested in is decisions you have taken, for example, on welfare, where the IFS, I think, put the figure to over 3 billion, on winter fuel, where your own government figures put the cost as an additional 1 billion. There will be known pressures from decisions you have taken, which will be coming in the forthcoming budget. And what I'm interested in is the trend of a fiscal headroom which was insufficient, and you've already had to take measures to restore it. Warnings of that and warnings from industry. And again, without getting into writing a budget ahead of October, I'm interested in the trends and whether you're concerned.
No, I mean, I am, Stephen. You've been in this.
Brace yourself. What you're about to witness is far from a routine committee exchange. This is a revealing moment that exposes the tensions simmering through Westminster. At the center is Keir Starmer, under scrutiny so intense that every word, every pause is measured. Across from him sits Steve Barclay, armed with numbers, well-briefed, and determined to extract answers the public expects from a prime minister in waiting or from any leader at the top. This isn't theater for theater's sake. It's a real-time test of leadership, competence, and accountability. And it tells us two things at once: the crushing pressure on Labour's leader and the relentless drive of his critics to expose every weak point, challenge every inconsistency, and shape the narrative before the nation. Before we roll the full footage, a quick word: if you value sharp, no-nonsense political analysis that cuts through the spin, subscribe to the channel. Most viewers watch without subscribing, but your support makes a real difference. Now, let's return to the exchange and dive into the political dynamics unfolding right before our eyes.
You've just been at pains to point out to Mr. Byrne how much you're spending on different things. In May, the government had the second highest borrowing since records began, with only peak COVID in May 2020 being higher.
Sorry, I missed the middle word there, Steve. I'm so sorry.
In May, your government borrowed the second highest amount since records began, £17.7 billion you borrowed just in the month of May, and only peak COVID in May 2020 was higher. Do you expect borrowing this year to be higher or in line with forecast at the budget?
Oh, in line with forecasts, and there have been monthly fluctuations, usually for global reasons, as you'll have seen in a number of other countries. But we have also obviously got our overarching fiscal rules in place, which are ironclad. One of them relating to borrowing as a proportion of debt.
So tomorrow we will get both the June figure but also the figure for your first year in government of how much you've borrowed. You're expecting that to be in line with what was set out in the budget?
Well, I'll see what the figures are tomorrow, and there have been, I think every month this year there have been fluctuations, broadly driven, and I think generally accepted as driven by events that are happening globally, almost capable of being tracked to them day by day, but I want to be in line with the forecasts. We've got the fiscal rules in place to ensure that we are in line with the forecasts.
Well, the spending decisions you're talking about weren't global factors, they're national decisions. At the spring statement, the OBR found that there was a £14 billion deterioration in the fiscal forecast, the fiscal outlook from between the budget and the spring statement. Industry analysts are predicting a similar amount of deterioration ahead of the budget. Again, is that something that you would reject?
Well, my experience so far has been of different predictions almost on a weekly basis as we get into the final stages of the budget, which is why I think it's important to see them over a slightly longer term and see what precisely those forecasts are when we get to the autumn. And I don't say that frivolously. I was very concerned only a few weeks ago when the conflict in the Middle East looked like it was going to escalate rather than de-escalate. I was very concerned about the impact that would have on oil prices and on our economy as a result. And therefore, I do think it's important for us to see this over a slightly longer term. We're tracking it, as you'd
people
imagine,
would accept
very,
that
very
slight
closely.
variations. What I'm trying to tease out is whether there's a trend, and you're rejecting, for example, pretty widely accepted industry analysts that there's an expected further deterioration. For example, ING had predicted a further 14 billion. You're saying that's quite wide of the mark.
Well, let's see what the OBR's forecasts are in the autumn.
Right.
As I say, my experience is that those forecasts change on a pretty regular basis, often according to external factors, and trying to guess now what the forecast might be in the autumn is fraught with all sorts of difficulties.
Fine. In terms of consistency then, given other things change, is it reasonable to say, with regard to the fiscal headroom that you set out, that as a point of principle, you feel that there should be a reasonable amount of fiscal headroom?
Yes.
And you took measures to restore the headroom in the spring statement. Was that because the fiscal headroom you put in place at the budget was too insufficient?
No, I don't think so. I'd gently point out that the fiscal headroom we put in the budget was considerably more than the last government put in their last budget by some measure. But then there was a lot of fluctuation in the early part of this year, particularly with conflicts in different parts of the world, but also with the immediate after effects of the tariff decisions that were being taken, for example, in America, had an impact. And it was right, in my view and the Chancellor's view, that we retained the fiscal headroom.
Okay, so even though the headroom at the budget was insufficient and you, in my view, rightly took measures at the spring statement to restore it, the OECD are wrong when they said last month, again, pointing to how thin the fiscal headroom is. Again, you feel both industry analysis is incorrect and you see warnings from the likes of the OECD as incorrect in terms of suggesting it is way too thin.
No, I'm not saying they're incorrect. I'm just saying I think it's important for us to look at it in the round and over the slightly longer period. I do think it's important to have that headroom, which is why we put it in the budget last autumn, and why in the spring statement we took the duty to put that headroom back in, which is what we did.
The OBR found that of 21 forecasts that they have done since 2010, all but one of those was overly optimistic. Are you confident that the OBR forecast done at the budget will not be over-optimistic this time?
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, that's a matter for the OBR. They make the forecast. They're there for a purpose. And we obviously take what forecast they put in place and act accordingly.
Okay, what I'm interested in is decisions you have taken, for example, on welfare, where the IFS, I think, put the figure to over 3 billion, on winter fuel, where your own government figures put the cost as an additional 1 billion. There will be known pressures from decisions you have taken, which will be coming in the forthcoming budget. And what I'm interested in is the trend of a fiscal headroom which was insufficient, and you've already had to take measures to restore it. Warnings of that and warnings from industry. And again, without getting into writing a budget ahead of October, I'm interested in the trends and whether you're concerned.
No, I mean, I am, Stephen. You've been in this position preparing for budgets, and you will know the experience, which is that there are forecasts that, as you lead into a budget, begin in the end come on a weekly basis and fluctuate week to week, literally, and therefore my experience of the budget and the spring statement is to focus intensely on the forecasts when we get them and prepare for them now according to our fiscal rules, which is what we're doing.
Well, you would accept that the size of gap we're talking about is more than mere fluctuations?
Well, I mean, look, back in the autumn, the OBR predicted one thing. By the spring, it predicted something else. By autumn, they will give their prediction going forward from there, and we have to work from that forecast.
But that's been consistent in a deteriorating line. That's the concern. It's not been fluctuating and getting better for some other time. It's been consistently deteriorating.
Well, different forecast different things. Nobody forecast that we'd have the highest growth in the G7 for the first quarter of this year, but we did. And I'm pleased about that. And I think the measures we're taking can create the conditions in which we can improve on that in the autumn and the budgets thereafter.
Before Steve Barclay even begins, the atmosphere says it all. This isn't casual sparring. This is controlled confrontation, a committee room where every sentence is on the record and every pause carries weight. And in that moment, Keir Starmer's face reveals the discipline behind his performance, a measured squint, not theatrical, just enough to signal focus, a polite nod that says, "Go on," while his mind races through options. It's the look of a man who has faced enough hostile questioning to know the danger isn't in the first question, it's in the follow-up, the layers of scrutiny that arrive one after another. Barclay clears his throat, thanks the chair, and moves without delay. No warm-up. No flattery. No detours into broad principles. He goes straight for the figures that sting hardest. £17.7 billion borrowed in May alone. A number so large it almost stops sounding real. And yet it sits there, plain as day. Barclay frames it for what it is, a staggering total only exceeded during the height of the pandemic. A figure that belongs to crisis, not ordinary government. The accusation doesn't need words, it's implied. If borrowing looks like emergency-era borrowing, what's the government's explanation? Starmer listens, controlled and steady, almost deliberately unsentimental. When he speaks, it's the familiar modern fiscal defense. Fluctuations, forecasts, global factors. Not nonsense, not wrong, borrowing can spike, revenues can shift, external conditions can change. He leans on uncertainty. The economy is not a machine with predictable outputs. He paints the broader picture, the wider context, with the tone of someone trying to appear responsible rather than reactive. But Barclay isn't there for lectures. He presses. His argument is simple. Stop blaming the world outside Britain. Yes, international factors matter. But this deterioration, his word choice deliberate, is being driven largely by national decisions, Westminster choices, policy calls, domestic priorities. And then he lands the political punch. The spring statement's £14 billion shortfall was already on the table. Not unforeseen. Surprise starts to look less like bad luck and more like mismanagement, or worse, willful optimism. Starmer shifts back to uncertainty. Markets fluctuate, conflicts abroad, oil prices unpredictable. Government must be guided by process, not panic. Calm, cautious, managerial. But Barclay won't relent. He raises independent analysis predicting another £14 billion downturn. The question is direct. Does Starmer reject it? Reject, and he risks looking dismissive. Accept, and he admits weakness. Clarity creates accountability. Accountability creates consequences. Starmer takes the classic route, defer. Wait for the official moment, he says. Responsible sounding, yet non-committal. In this room, that avoidance is exactly what Barclay is exposing. The rhythm continues. Barclay demands specificity. Starmer delivers process. Barclay points to deterioration. Starmer emphasizes uncertainty. Barclay asks for judgment. Starmer offers a timeline. Then comes fiscal headroom, the buffer between commitments and the ability to fund them. Without it, every announcement risks crisis. Barclay frames it as a warning. Britain's financial buffer is dangerously thin. Starmer responds with forecasts, political logic of inheritance. Problems didn't begin today. But the clear statement Barclay wants, how much room exists, what happens if forecasts worsen, remains elusive. Barclay tightens the screw, citing historical optimism in forecasts. Starmer deflects again, broad framing, balanced language, insisting on the bigger picture. At this point, the exchange is no longer a single argument about a single number. It's a tour of commitments, liabilities, winter fuel payments, welfare spending, a demonstration of how quickly billions pile up and political certainty becomes fragile. Barclay returns to his theme. This is not fluctuation. This is deterioration. Decline, drift, structural weakness. Starmer's responses remain disciplined. Forecasts differ, outcomes shift, external pressures change. Steady, adult, responsible. Avoid blunt admissions that become tomorrow's headlines. As the session ends, Barclay thanks the chair. Politeness with a firm undertone. Starmer leaves with a smile, not triumphant, but survivalist. He conceded nothing directly, stayed upright, refused the admissions Barclay sought. In Westminster terms, that steadiness is often treated as victory. But for the public, the bigger question lingers. Were any real answers given? Or was this another demonstration of Britain's political craft, the art of evasion dressed as seriousness? Words folded into careful shapes until the original question disappears. Fluctuations, deferrals, phrases that sound sensible until you realize they function as shields. But consequences cannot be shielded forever. They are measured in money, billions of pounds, month after month, commitment after commitment. In what the state can afford, what it cannot, and what the public ultimately pays. This is political theater, yes, but theater with a price tag. And if there's a single message from this session, it's resilience under scrutiny, a government holding its line, a challenger refusing to accept it, and a nation left to decide whether process has become a substitute for answers. The enduring British tradition on full display, answering without answering.